There's a lot of tips online on how to write, but I find a lot of them to not be very helpful. It's things like read, use the right tools, structure your work, write every day. And I don't know about you, but to me that's still pretty vague. And I feel like a lot of the more kind of in-depth information is harder to come by. Like, how do you structure your work? So yeah, for this video I thought I would share how I structure my writing and how I structure my writing sessions. My name is Josie and I'm an illustrator. I'm based in Sweden. I'm from Sweden and I'm based in Sweden. I'm from the north and I live in the south. That's more than you need to know for this specific video, but since I was very young I've been writing stories. And currently I'm working on a story for children that I'm hoping will turn into something that I eventually publish in one way or another. If you're interested in writing or you have been writing but you're not sure what works for you yet, then maybe some of the things that I say in this video can be helpful. So yeah, when it comes to the tips that you find online, it's like read a lot. If you're interested in writing, I feel like by default you do read. Like you have an interest in consuming text or even just listening to stories. And also like write every day. And that's not realistic for most people who work or even people who don't work. Like there's a lot of other obligations in life that take up time, and to shame people for not spending their free time every day on a specific thing, it's not good advice either. Obviously, if you spend just 20 minutes a day, then at the end of a year, you will obviously have spent a lot of time writing. It's not just about the time that you put in, it's mostly about the structure. From experience, from having given myself these really strict deadlines, been really disciplined with myself in the past, I don't think that just telling yourself, oh, just spend your 20 minutes is going to actually improve your writing or make you write more. It's not going to bring you further to your goal, which might be to write more stories. And I'm not saying to like wait for inspiration to strike either, because inspiration is, in my experience, momentum based. If you push that boulder, it will start to roll after a while, but you have to give it that initial push. So I love painting, I love drawing, I love writing, I love running and experiencing new things, but I also really love being at home. I'm a homebody, I'm an introvert, I need a lot of energy to recharge before I can do things. So sometimes I have to decide for myself that I'm going to do the things that I love doing. Because if I don't decide to do them, then escaping into my little comfortable spot is going to win every time. But once I sit down to write, or I sit down to paint, or I go for a run, or I, go to a museum or try to experience something new, I will always be happy that I did that. Then I will feel more fulfilled than if I didn't do that. Now, there's obviously time for rest too. I'm not forcing myself to do things when I don't have the energy to. And I think that's the difference. So what I'm saying and what I'm figuring out for myself right now is it's probably more important to know how you're spending your writing time or your painting time or whatever it is than the amount of minutes. With that out the way, we're moving into the office and I'm going to show you how I structure my writing. And yeah, I don't know if I remember to say this, but there is no right way of doing things. I'm not pretending like I'm an expert. I'm still figuring my routine out. I do not write every day or every week even, because it takes a lot of energy from me. It takes a lot more energy than painting does. Even takes a lot more energy than filming does, actually, because I'm very emotionally attached to my writing and the stories that I'm trying to tell. So, and it takes research. For me, completely respect it if not everyone researches before they write. But for me, in my work and the stories that I'm wanting to tell, there's some details that I want to get right. So yeah, with that out the way, let's go to the office. And then you encounter problems and you have to go back and edit and edit and edit and edit. That is what I'm not good at, but it takes practice in order to get better. So okay, I get why the writing advice or tips on writing are so unhelpful, and I think it's because we're all different. You won't figure out what works until you try. So like I said, when I was younger, specifically when I was a student, I had this really strict idea of what success was at the time. You're gonna have to sustain yourself for a long time if you're dreaming about a creative life. Some people really thrive being disciplined, and that's great for them, but I think it's generally unrealistic to set that as a standard for yourself. When I was writing in the past, I didn't really have a goal. I was just like, I'll sit down, and because I'm so enamored with the story and like inspired by these concepts, then they're just gonna pour out for me when I sit down to write. And spoiler alert, most of you people will already know where this is going. It doesn't work that way. When you're on day 1, 2, 3, maybe even a week into this project, but if it's a long-term project, then day 107, if you even reach it, it's going to be really tough. Because at some point, I feel like when you write, a lot of things present themselves in the moment. Yeah, they're not going to want to play out the way that you imagined in your head. And it takes a lot of thinking to connect those dots. I'm currently experimenting with a way of plotting that involves the long-term structure of a thing. Does that make sense? Like I said, I've written a lot of short stories. I really like writing short stories, but I am aware that it's a difficult medium to get readers into because a lot of people like books. In that case, we have an example of something that I know works for me. And so I'm trying to think of the chapters of my longer stories as short stories, because it's still true. There is a story arc within a chapter, certain points that you need to hit, because I know I get really excited about writing a short story. I write out my chapters as prompts. For the first draft, I just let myself stay within that. I think a lot of us are familiar with the 3-arc story structure. I'm not going to go into that specifically because it is available online, and it doesn't really, it doesn't tell you how to write a story. It just gives you some hints as to a structure. And I've tried structuring my stories after that in the past and really struggled because I get really hung up on how much time have I spent in this 3-part? How much time have I spent in this act? And should I move on? When I decided that I wanted to write more this year, I started looking into the 7-point story structure. To me, it's really good to have a visual when I plan. So I make maps, and I make them often, and I usually draw the same thing, but I need it for my brain to feel like I'm in control of the story. And I think the 7 points work a lot better for me, because then I can write out the general idea of the story and realize where I'm lacking some tension. And then what I do is I take those 7 points and I double them. So then I have approximately 14 chapters that are really clearly defined what's supposed to happen in each. So we have 1 or 2 of introducing the character, introducing the world, and introducing the issue, the problem, the thing that we're going to be working on in the story. And then I get the call to adventure, or whatever you want to call the different steps. But there's these typical steps to a story that are sort of universal. And you can treat them however you want. You can try to divert from them, but you're still adhering to the rules, even when you're diverting from these points. I hope I'm making sense. Right off the bat, I know that I have 14 or 15 chapters to begin with. And like I said, I try to tackle them each as a short form story. I don't write them all in one sitting. I don't sit down and write a whole chapter in one sitting. That's preposterous. But for my first draft, I do. If you saw my last video where I talk about We Need Your Art, you will know I mentioned these writing sprints. Basically, in that book, Amy McNee presents an artist's reset, which is a bare minimum creative thing that you can do every day for 1 or 2 weeks. I did that for myself in the beginning of summer. The goal was to every day write 250 words about the weather. And they became these little micro stories or scenes inspired by the weather that day. And I didn't do it every day, but that wasn't the point. I found that that specific formula really worked for me. So I'm taking that and I'm applying it to my first draft. Obviously, I'm in the middle of drafting my first draft, of getting it out there. So I'm still figuring out if this is something that's going to work long term. And I expect it's going to be different for every story. But for this particular one, which is a shorter one, it's a children's book, I'm allowing myself to go a bit more easy on myself. Not because I think it's less important, but because it should be fun. If I want children to want to read it, it's got to be exciting. And so I try to keep that in mind when I write. Hopefully, my explanation of how I structure my writing in the beginning stages of this particular project that I'm working on currently, that I can't say is the rule for everything that I've written, hopefully that makes sense. How do I structure my specific 20 minutes? Spoiler alert, I don't just spend 20 minutes. I did that for my artist reset because it was such a short little spurt and I wrote it on my commute. The 20 minutes, we're throwing that out the window. It's unrealistic because I can't keep that up every day. Anyway, God, I'm rambling. We have this list of prompts and now we can structure a writing session. So now currently for my writing sessions, here's what I do. I choose to write 1 or 2 prompts, but I don't decide which in advance because I find that that takes a lot of energy and it sets me up for disappointment. And I'm really sensitive to disappointment. I do not read what I've already written. I focus on 1 prompt at a time. Kind of choose it randomly. It's gotten harder the more I've written because obviously there's less to choose from. Give myself notes, but not editing straight away. I think it's important to let things rest. And I think that's also why it's important for me to write out of order. And I'm really glad that I wrote the conclusion first. I mean, you can change the conclusion. That's the whole thing. Last week, I went on a writing session. It was the first since you last saw me write, which was in the Tove Jansson video. I tried not to beat myself up about that, but because I'm nearing the end of the first draft, I've checked off almost every prompt in my list. I was struggling. I was feeling some pressure. And I'm trying to just notice these things and observe them without judgment. And I wrote down how I felt because I thought maybe it'd be useful. There's a fear/resistance that comes up when I've started something like this. I want the story to exist. I have it clearly in my mind, but I'm afraid that I don't have the ability to translate it into words. When I examine this fear, it's hard to tell exactly where it comes from, because it isn't necessarily perfectionism. I know I can't do it perfectly on the first try, and I'm excited about editing later. I also know not everyone will like what I write, and I am okay with that too. The only thing that has worked for me so far, as much as I love starting a writing project from the beginning, is writing out of order and making the first draft just very short scenes or pictures, images. But the biggest thing, which is also the hardest thing, is to just start. Thinking about something for too long kills it and makes it into this huge Goliath of a task. Just starting and telling myself, this is just a sentence that I can change, has been the biggest game changer. As opposed to thinking, this is a story that I've cared about for years. Obviously, writing that down meant that I had already started writing. I had given the boulder a push, and it was a lot easier to start with the actual prompts. Warmed up my word factory, and I'd gotten that momentum to start creating and thinking. When I start my first draft, I not only just have a vague idea what I want the story to be, I haven't spent lots of time fleshing out characters yet or their motives. I just have like a feeling of where I want things to go. This is important. I write my prompts in a way where I know that they will actually prompt me. I don't just write character X is introduced, Y thing happens, Z artifact is found, because that's not going to make me excited to write. The more I work on my writing and the more I try to plot, because it's so clear to me that I want to write and that I have so many stories talking at me, yelling at me to be written, and I want to write them and I want to share them with people. But the work of getting them out can be really emotional, and it can be just very draining for your brain because it's translating feelings and experiences and knowledge that you think other people will understand. Not like everyone understands exactly where I'm coming from and everyone's going to have their own interpretation, but you know, it is a very specific kind of work to write that I feel is different from painting. Writing and painting have kind of like worked side by side for most of my life. I think the writing part of my life has been a lot more intimate and personal, and I think that's why I haven't shared it with people before. And I also think that's why I'm a little bit scared of sharing my writing with people, because it's like inviting people into your brain and all of your secrets. It feels like revealing all your secrets to people and like your absolute worst side of yourself, but also this side of yourself that you hope people will accept. We hear people who are really prolific, like Stephen King or Brandon Sanderson, who I've mentioned like a billion times on this channel now. You know, it's great to hear people that you look up to and hear them talking about things. But I think the more I practice my art and the more I practice my writing, the more I realize that what you should take away isn't that Brandon Sanderson spends 8 hours a day writing, and that if you do that, you'll be as successful or prolific. The takeaway is finding a pattern that works for you, because he specifically says he writes in the afternoon and then after his children goes to bed. At least that's what I've heard. So he finds time to work around his lifestyle and he wants to spend time with his family. Also, obviously, now having published so many books, he can afford to spend that time, and that's another important factor. And I think also with the speed of things today, it's really hard to accept that you need to take breaks and that things take time, and forcing things is never going to make it better. It's going to burn you out. It's not sustainable. And I just want to build like a mindful, kind routine for myself. I hope you liked this video and I hope it was informative. Maybe there's something here that you got out of it. Do you have any thoughts of your own or anything that you've learned in your own process? I'd love to hear that. Really, one of my favorite things with this channel has been the overwhelming positive feedback and people wanting to share their own knowledge with me. Oh God, I can't get emotional in every single video. Fully restoring my faith in humanity. How kind a lot of you people are. I've gotten book recommendations, film recommendations, people wanting to share their process with me, and it's so freaking sweet. Okay, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe you learned something, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope to see you back here soon. Take care.